I'd like to call to order the Town of Hilton Head Island Community Services and Public Safety Committee meeting of March 22nd, 2021. Bill Harkins, the designated chair, had a medical appointment this morning and was uncertain whether he'd be able to make it, so he has asked me to fill in for him. As a result of that, Glenn Stanford, who is the designated alternate, is also on this call, as is Alex Brown and Councilman David Ems. Karen, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Committee members, please unmute yourself and reply with present or here. Karen, please call the roll.
Mrs. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
Mr. Ems?
Here.
And Mr. Stanford?
Here.
May I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of February 22nd, 2021?
So moved.
And second by Tammy. And I must say, Karen, these minutes were very, very well written. Committee members, please unmute yourself and vote yes or no.
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Mr. Ems?
Yes.
And Mr. Stanford?
Tom, I don't think I can vote because I didn't attend that meeting.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you.
Karen, have we any public comments?
Sir, public comments concerning today's agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The public comment period closed Friday, March 19th at 4:30 p.m. At the conclusion of the open town hall, there were no citizen comments. Citizens who wished to speak at the meeting had to call in no later than noon on Friday, March 19th. No citizens signed up to speak at the meeting.
Thank you. We have no unfinished business. Under new business, we have 4 agenda items. The first is a presentation by Mr. Fred Lyda, the Beaufort County Human Services Director, on homeless and insecure individuals on Hilton Head Island and Beaufort County. Mr. Lyda, welcome. Please unmute.
Thank you. I just did. The moderator had me muted. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. As mentioned, I'm the Human Services Director for Beaufort County, and in that capacity, I serve as a facilitator for a network called the Human Services Alliance. Some of you may be aware of this. It's been around for quite a while. We started it probably a good 40 years ago. And back around 2000, 2006, we began a community indicators project to begin looking at specific data around various topics of quality of life in our community. That process is called Together for Beaufort County, and it's been now in existence ever since 2006. We have about 24 work groups that are all trying to have an impact in quality of life. One of those is called our Community Services Organization, which has implemented a secure database called Charity Tracker as a means of being able to keep track of the folks who are indigent and looking for assistance from our community from a variety of sources, whether those are federal, state, or local nonprofit organizations that are helping them out. Charity Tracker gives us the ability to be able to keep track of the folks that we're helping. This is not done so that we can have any kind of a punitive measure where we can, wag our finger at someone and say, oh, you've asked for food for 6 times in the last month. But it is so that we can say, hey, you've asked for food 6 times in the last month. Can we have a conversation about what's going on so that we're going to get you the food. That's going to happen. But we'd like to have a conversation about what it is that's happening in your family. Are you going to have to come back again next month and ask for assistance again? So that leads to an interview and a process that helps us to better understand what the underlying problems are in that family so that we can begin to make recommendations and referrals for services that might be able to get them out of the situation rather than just slapping a Band-Aid and meeting the immediate crisis or the immediate need. We try to look at the underlying factors. Over the years of doing that, we've been able to gather a considerable amount of data around the populations that we serve. My assistant, Ben Boswell, is here with me this morning. He's got a lot of the data that we've been keeping track of now since 2006 and can give you a little bit of a picture of not only the numbers that we're talking about, but the definition of terms, because the term homeless is kind of a nebulous concept, especially when you start getting into HUD and other federal and state agencies. So Ben, if you would.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I just want to preface this with the definition. So HUD defines homeless, you are either sheltered or you are unsheltered. And under that definition, you could, from a layman's perspective, still be homeless, but they're only concerned about those people who are either living on the streets or in their cars or in abandoned or insufficient housing. That would be considered unsheltered, whereas individuals who are living in motels or other safer situations would be considered sheltered. So when we look at our data, we look more specifically at the scenario in which they're living. And so we have two definitions that we use. We look at homeless, and these are the individuals who are completely unsheltered. And then we look at housing insecure. And housing insecure folks are folks who are about to be homeless. They either have a eviction notice active, or they are living in a motel, or they have lost their home. They're living with friends or family. But in any of those situations, that tomorrow could roll around and they won't have a house or a place to stay. So countywide, we have 54 homeless households, and we consider a household as one unit of individuals. So about 100 individuals who are completely unsheltered. If we expand that to include all of our individuals who are housing insecure, then we have 756 individuals, of which 224 are children and 111 are senior citizens.
Well, remember that when he talks about these numbers, this data is coming from Charity Tracker, which it means that this population has reached out for assistance. So that means we are not counting all the other folks who show up at food pantries and so forth that don't use Charity Tracker, that are not being recorded as a part of that. So anybody who's worked in statistics knows that if you are doing some type of a survey of a population, you're really, really lucky and doing well if you get 10%. So at 750 some individuals, we could be looking at somewhere around 7,000 individuals countywide, if that is an indication, a 10% indication of the total population. The challenge with working with this population and being able to begin to move them towards more stability comes from having to look at why they're in the situation that they're in. Some of the folks that are in these situations are there by choice. They want their independence. They want to be separated from any other needs, and they like that freedom. Often they are aware of where they can go for assistance. They just don't want that assistance, either because they are dealing with a mental health issue, they're dealing with a drug and alcohol issue, or they just, like I said, simply choose that they don't want to be getting assistance from folks. The way you're going to make an impact in that population is by building relationships. You don't just walk up to somebody off the street and say, I think you need drug and alcohol treatment, or I think you need mental health treatment. That takes time. You have to build a relationship of trust and respect. And over time, you'll be able to eventually begin to move that person towards recognizing that they have an issue and that they need to get help, and you can then get them into help. But that's not the kind of thing that's just going to happen by just walking up to somebody and kind of engaging with them. The other thing that has been learned by HUD and others around our country is that in order to get a person from a homeless situation into a housing secure one, you can't just plop them down into a house. There's a whole lot more behind how they're in that situation and why they're in that situation. The other extreme is that folks will say, well, they have to get off the drugs or the alcohol, or they have to get on their mental health medication regimen before we're going to give them a place to stay. Statistically, we know that just doesn't work. And if you think about it anecdotally, it makes sense. If someone's working with an alcohol addiction and they're going to their AA meetings regularly, you can only imagine the conversation that would be had when here they've built up this cohort of support people that they come and they meet with at meetings, at their AA meetings, and at the end of the meeting they're going to wave and say, okay, see you guys, I'll be back, I'm going back under the bridge. You know, you're not going to solve that problem in that way. So what we're looking at is trying to be able to develop a position. We're talking with county council now to try to develop a position that would be a housing insecure coordinator, homeless coordinator. We're not really firm on the title yet. We gotta come up with something a little more politically correct than a homeless coordinator. But the concept would be that we would have a full-time 40-hour position, a social worker who would be able to build those kinds of relationships. As you saw from the numbers Ben just described, there's a significant number of folks in the community who are in this situation. But when you look at the most severe cases, and we kind of did this by going to two sources. We went to the county detention center, and we went to Buford Memorial Hospital, the county hospital psychiatric ward. We asked each of these organizations to tell us how many people come in and out of your facility more than 3 times in 1 year. And it's interesting, the answer that we got both from the detention center and from the hospital psych ward was exactly 47. What do you want to bet we're dealing with the same 47 people? And they're going either from the detention center or to the psych ward, back and forth. We've got a gentleman who's been living in our detention center for 10 months out of a year, every year, simply because his family doesn't know how to cope with his disability. They are getting a disability check, so they want him to continue to stay living with them. But because they don't know how to deal with him, they call him in for trespassing. He gets 30 days. He spends 30 days in the detention center, gets released, comes home for a couple of days, and they call him in for trespassing again. So obviously that's not the way you're going to deal with an individual like that. It's turning our detention center into a shelter. And so what we're putting forward is a concept of trying to come up with an individual who would work countywide. The reason we're speaking to each of the municipalities about this is that if this person is going to be effective, they're going to have to interface with all the various jurisdictions. Law enforcement probably the most critical. As you can imagine, law enforcement deals with this population probably the most on a day-to-day basis. So it becomes a really good mechanism for us to use to be able to take this social worker and have them work in conjunction with local law enforcement agencies to try to identify the individuals and begin to develop those relationships that will eventually help them to turn that situation around and become housing secure. I think that Ben, did I miss anything?
No, I think it's about everything. I guess I want to add that there are a number of models that any community can implement, and they all kind of follow the same continuum, as it were. And the major goal of identifying this individual would be to help improve a system what's called coordinated entry. And this basically just means that everybody in our community is going to be on the same page when they interact or interface with a person who's experiencing housing insecurity or experiencing homelessness, that they would know exactly who to call, and that person would know exactly what resources are available, which I think will improve first of all of our lives as professionals working in this field, for one, but also it's going to improve the quality of service that these individuals receive as well.
Anyone have any questions?
Brett, thank you, and Ben as well. Committee, what questions or comments would you have? Alex?
Sure. Thank you, Councilman Lennox and Mr. Later, Mr. Boswell. Thank you for joining us. Really applaud your efforts. I've got I guess a couple of questions. I'm understanding the goal here and the concept. If you could just help me out a little bit in terms of how the coordinator will have some jurisdiction to a degree. The municipalities, sheriff's office, medical providers, I get that, but I'm more interested in the agencies that are currently filling the gaps. Hilton Head and Beaufort County to a degree kind of deem themselves as limited service governments. But I know that there are a lot of organizations that are working on, food insecurity, housing insecurity, and that sort of thing. Just wanted to know how this coordinator will interact and to a degree, maybe even mandate those organizations. And I guess I'm being specific with the mandate. The charity tracker that you mentioned seems to be our only way of measuring at the moment. And, I've been a part of many presentations when it comes to community block grant funding, and we can never get our arms wrapped around a number, right? But you figured a way to try to get to that number. But I think we can enhance that with those other organizations. So if you could just kind of talk me through how they would coordinate, that would help me.
Sure. So early in my presentation, I mentioned the Human Services Alliance and specifically the work group called the Community Services Organization. That network or that group is made up of all the food, clothing, and shelter providers. So Project Deepwell, Bluffton Self-Help, Help of Buford, Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, United Way. Those are all members and organizations like Second Helpings, which collects food from different sources and then distributes it to different food pantries, is one of our best agencies in terms of trying to encourage all of these various nonprofits to get on board and use Charity Tracker. If an organization isn't using Charity Tracker, we have no way of being able to capture that information. So it's in our best interest, and it's actually in best interest of the provider and the client for all of us to be on Charity Tracker so that we have that safety net that's in place. Otherwise, those lone organizations that are out there that are operating and maybe operating a soup kitchen or handing out food that's not being recorded, that becomes like a hole in the safety net because there's not the conversation being had around how we can help that individual. So all of those organizations, most of those organizations are networked into Charity Tracker at this point. Ben, I think the last time I asked you this question, you said that the number of agencies in Charity Tracker was about 60 or 70, was it?
It's 65 agencies.
65 agencies that are currently using Charity Tracker. Also, Alex, the other piece of this is one of the things that would come with working with the local HUD continuum of care is that this individual would be able to tap into what's called HMIS data, the Homeless Management Information System. That's the system that's used nationwide by HUD in order to track homeless populations. And so this person would be able to have access to that data and entering data into that database. Again, it goes to what Ben was talking about, a coordinated point of entry. We need some mechanism so that we don't have a wide range of disparate organizations all operating in silos, not talking to each other, not communicating about the situation that they're on. We need to be able to have a way to coordinate all of that. And we feel like having this individual be in that paid position 40 hours a week is going to give us the ability to kind of channel all of that effort into a coordinated system as opposed to just operating independently. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely, going in the right direction. Those 65 agencies, as we move forward, I would just suggest that that translates into a percentage of total agencies so that we start to have more confidence in the numbers that are being provided, that they're accurate, right? So I appreciate the direction. Just two more questions, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned mental illness as one of the factors in a lot of these cases, and I've been told that there's a short gap in terms of facilities and care when it comes to mental illness, and too often our sheriff's department is being asked to step in and deal with those situations. Any future plans on how we can get better at that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, a system has just recently been put into place called CCRI, and that's working with the Department of Mental Health and the Sheriff's Office, so that there is a 24/7, there is a crisis counselor who is available, so that if a law enforcement call comes in and it becomes clear that what we're dealing with is a mental health issue, then CCRI is contacted, and that individual, that crisis counselor, is brought into the scene immediately, whether that's over the phone initially to see if they can de-escalate the situation that way, or if necessary, they're transported directly to where the site is, where the individual is, and they're able to do counseling there. As far as housing is concerned, the South Carolina Department of Mental Health actually had an excess of funds this year. I got calls from the director saying, do you have anybody who is in need of housing who has mental health issues? So the more we have this coordinated entry system in place and we're able to identify those folks, when resources like that become available, we're not just scrambling to try to find somebody. We actually have a system that can say, yes, as a matter of fact, these 3 individuals are all housing insecure and they are dealing with mental health issues. We can turn that information over to the Department of Mental Health and they can begin housing those individuals. We do have housing for assistance for mental health folks in the state. We don't have the state psych hospital like we used to, and that was a problem that happened, back in the 80s, which also tied directly to the increase in the homeless population across the country. As soon as we shut down those facilities, the percentage of homeless people went up. So we know that that's a big factor in being able to address the population.
Okay. The other item, which was not mentioned, but I'm curious to know if it's on your radar or not. I guess this would be, as an example, those that are on the brink of housing security, okay, the threat of being evicted and that sort of thing. A lot of cases, that's because of some economical shortfall. So the question of livable wage, has that bubbled up to any degree?
Definitely.
Okay. Go ahead.
So one of the systems that we have in our community is called 524-HELP. So anybody in the community can call 843-524-HELP, and you will access the United Way helpline. That function, there's an individual at the other end of that line who's trained in doing interviewing and assessment. The difference is if you call, are you familiar with the 211 system?
No.
Okay, so if you call 211, it's going to route you to an organization out of Columbia, and they have a directory of all the various agencies that will provide assistance. So let's say that you're having trouble paying your light bill, and you call 211. They're going to give you a list of 3 or 4 agencies that will cover the cost of your light bill. All they're going to give you is the name of the organization and their phone number. It will then be up to you to contact those organizations and try to identify whether or not you're going to be able to get money to cover your light bill. Our helpline is like 211, except instead of just giving a referral, a phone number and a name, you're actually going through an assessment interview where the individual is asking you questions. How did you get to the situation where you can't pay your light bill? What happened? Was there a breadwinner in the family who was laid off? Did a vehicle break down? Do you just not earn enough money because you don't have a high enough education? And you need to improve your education in order to be able to get a better paying job. So all of those would go into and currently go into the assessment that's being done when someone calls 524-HELP. That helps us to get a better picture of the underlying causes. And if that underlying cause is a lack of education or a lack of employment, then we can connect them with folks. We can talk about vocational rehabilitation, Goodwill. There's a number of different organizations that can help people identify employment if that's what their struggle is. Or maybe we need to get a GED. Maybe they need credit counseling so that they can get out of credit debt. And the situation isn't so much that they don't earn enough, it's that they're spending more than they're earning. So we have systems in place that are all part of this network, the Alliance network, that can be brought to bear to assist individuals once we identify those underlying causes. And certainly employment and the wage that is earned in the community is a major factor there.
Thank you, Mr. Lader. In closing, I'll just say, and Mr. Orlando, if you can make note of this, I asked Councilman Hawkins to invite the Chamber of Commerce to this meeting, and I'm not sure if they're on the line. There's some names I don't recognize, but if we can get a report, if they are in attendance or not, that'd be great. And my reasoning for that is because this topic, at least in my mind, really speaks to our plan in the realms of inclusiveness and excellence, right? And I really applaud your organization for trying to pull this together. And I understand that you're going to need assistance and support from the municipalities. And I, for one, would hope that Hilton Head really steps up to the plate, because this issue, although it has been in the shadows for a long time, it is real. And if we're going to promote Hilton Head as a place of excellence, then that means that all folks have to be on board. Our business community needs to understand these issues. They need to have metrics in place so that we can react. So continued support, at least from my end, moving forward on this. I'd ask that we just continue to have tangible data in front of us so that we know that we are making a difference. That's very important down the road, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Fred and Ben? Fred, I'd be interested in your impression of the trends that you're seeing regionally in the county and on the island. Are we up, down, sideways? What do you see trending?
It's increasing. The pandemic, no question, has had a major impact on increase. Not only are we increasing, but the types of people that are asking for assistance are changing. Folks that would have been normally considered kind of middle class and never had to ask for help are suddenly in a situation where they're not sure how they're going to make ends meet. And the challenge there is that they don't know the systems in the community as well as the low-income folks who have been going to those places for help all along. They know where to go. Yeah. Folks that have never been in this situation before are struggling and are trying to identify where to get help. So yeah, the numbers are definitely going up. Ben, do you want to make a comment on that in terms of the trend?
Yeah, I don't have firm numbers just yet, just because the coronavirus stuff is, even though it's been going on for a while, it's still relatively new in terms of our trends. But I know that food pantries across the board have seen a significant increase. In terms of housing security, because of the moratoriums, that has not moved much. But that makes all of us pretty nervous, because we don't know, as a result, what will happen when those moratoriums are lifted. And so everybody's kind of bracing themselves for what might happen when that occurs. So lots of unknowns.
I had the chance to visit a food pantry before the pandemic and sit down with a lot of the people that came to the pantry. Much to my surprise, there were families that were coming to the pantry and taking food back home. But some of the guys that I spoke with were pretty open and said food is not an issue. There's enough places on the island and in the county to get food, but they clearly said shelter is the issue.
Yeah,
yep,
that's
no question about
accurate. 100%. Yep.
Glenn?
Does he not see me?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. This is very informative to me. I have two questions, I think. The first is do you find that the unsheltered or homeless are fairly evenly distributed over the county, or do they occur in pockets? And then specifically, Do you have any sort of measure of the population here on Hilton Head Island?
Excellent question. And the answer is this population is so transient that any number I gave you would be no good 5 minutes after I gave it to you. The population is constantly moving from one location to another, so you can't look at pockets of them. There are systems in place that cause them to congregate in some ways. So for example, if a person is arrested for trespassing and they're found homeless on Hilton Head, that individual is going to be taken to the detention center in the city of Beaufort. When they're released from the detention center 30 days later or whenever they get out of the detention center, they're now in Beaufort. And if they don't have a ride back to Hilton Head, maybe where they have their space or where they have their connections, their family, their friends, the people that they rely on, they now become homeless in Beaufort. So our systems are kind of designed to kind of move that population in some regards, but we find that they're pretty much scattered across. There's a lot of population that moves back and forth between Hilton Head and Bluffton. They're way too transient in order to be able to give you a number that's tied directly to one's population. Ben, you had some numbers at one point on Hilton Head. Are those still available?
Yeah. Now this includes homeless and housing insecure. Is about 85 individuals on Hilton Head. But your street homeless individual. This is your guy who's sleeping on benches and stuff, like in Waterfront Park in downtown Beaufort. That's going to be a different population than your guys who are going to be in the woods, because there's when you differentiate between those who are the kind of the self-sufficient survivalists versus panhandlers, in which case those are a minority. We're talking about, I want to say, of those who are street homeless in Hilton Head, I think the number ranges anywhere between 10 and 20. And all of those folks are going to be congregating in those highly urbanized areas with a lot of foot traffic, typically areas you see a lot of tourists, just because it makes it easier to do the ask for money or to find food.
Tammy.
Tamara, you had a question that you wanted to ask?
Okay, Glenn, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, I'll finish and then get out of the way here. The second question is, explain to us the cooperation and relationship that you have with our countywide law enforcement, i.e. the Sheriff's Department.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, we have a program called CCRI that is working directly with the Sheriff's Office, and that is to help put mental health counselors, crisis counselors, at the disposal of the deputy when he gets called out on a call that clearly has a mental health issue that's involved. We also have a number of different courts. There's the drug court, that's a veterans court, there's the mental health court. So through the solicitor's office, we interact with those organizations as a mechanism for being able to maybe put a little bit of pressure on an individual to be able to get assistance when they're reluctant to do that.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I would comment to you that it would be useful for you to spread this program and your presentation here this morning more broadly if you can. What I'm thinking about is the community service organizations, the Rotary clubs, and things like that, to get that word out, because I think the more the word is out, the more support you'll be getting. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we've made presentations to several of the municipalities so far. We're working our way around the county. Tamara, you have a question?
I do. So jumping in, so the questions that have been asked have been very informative with the answers that you've given and very helpful to me. The presentation was very broad and provided a lot of data and information that was also very helpful to me. I want to focus back on one of the key elements, though, that you presented, which was that one-on-one personal relationship building that seems really to be the key. So in my mind, in just short background, my degrees are in counseling and drug and alcohol addictions and criminal behavior. So I see this a little bit, it may be from a different viewpoint, but that that relationship building. I'm curious because that kind of begins the process. And then we have all these wonderful, especially on Hilton Head, and I know around the county and the state, frankly, organizations that have picked up the ball and assist us in remaining the limited government that we choose to be. And so I'm interested in how that gets affected. Because if you have just one coordinator trying to streamline things the best you can once it reaches you, you're not necessarily really implementing that one-on-one relationship. People who are in need of that type of persuasion, right? Because those folks who knock on your doors or knock on self-motivation, right? They've got that key element that you need to be able to survive and persevere with the assistance by asking for help. It's those who don't that I worry about, because if there's mental illness or there's a drug alcohol addiction or other issues, they're hiding in the shadows, willing to take that step forward for fear of many things. And so I asked that question, and then the follow-up question for me would be, you mentioned a social worker as that point of contact that you're looking for the county to hopefully hire. I would be really strongly interested in the credential. I'm just going to leave it at that. It needs to be, in my mind, a very strong, broad scope, educated, credentialed person, and not that I'm demeaning anybody's particular background, but not just a social worker. Something more broad. So I'm not sure if that was a question, but I certainly would be interested in hearing your thoughts on it.
So thank you. My system kind of glitched while you were talking, so I lost a good chunk of what you were asking, but I think I get the gist of what you were saying. We agree that the individual would have to have a very broad background. We've been talking to folks from other communities around the country who have similar systems in place to talk about what the caliber of individual that they have that are doing those kinds of that kind of work. But we agree that the person is going to need to be much more, have a broad background in order to be able to make this work. And as far as connecting with the other resources, we agree that this person is not going to become a full-time counselor that's going to work one-on-one with every one of those individuals. But the idea will be to develop enough of a relationship that you can engage in motivational interviews and things like that that will eventually, hopefully, move that person to the point where they're willing to say, I need assistance, at which point we would then have a warm handoff where that individual would be turned over to one of the other organizations in the community who are doing that work. We're not going to try to replicate and duplicate what services that are already available in the community. The individual will simply be the point of contact, that point of entry to develop that initial relationship, and then be able to hand that individual off to another professional in the community who is already trained and working with that population specific to whatever we identify that individual is struggling with. So if that's mental health, we'd be connecting them through NAMI, through Coastal Empire Mental Health, through private counselors, wherever we were able to get assistance from them. Same thing with alcohol and drug abuse, connecting them with the Department of Alcohol and Drug Abuse or the OTIS program in the area. We've got halfway houses and places like that where we can put people who are shelter people who are in recovery from addiction. So the network is there. We just want this individual to serve kind of as the funnel that will bring them from the wider community into touch with an individual who can begin to develop that relationship and then hand them off to an organization in the community that's specifically trained in dealing with their issues. The person's not going to be able to be all things to all people. He or she is not going to be a drug and alcohol counselor and a mental health counselor and a crisis counselor and a social worker. We're not going to be able to do that. And nor does the model that we're looking at require that. So, like I said, we're talking to other communities about what the qualifications are that are needed for an individual in that situation. but I'd welcome your input.
Workshops, seminars, that sort of thing, so that the volunteer nonprofit organizations who may be looking for additional skill training, insights, would have a resource for that type of outreach as well. So just wanting to make sure that everybody's, getting the proper type of training, getting the right type of, this is a very difficult area that you work in. I appreciate that. And
yes, it is.
It takes a particular skill set to be effective, and that on the ground person who's able to communicate and relate to individuals who are struggling and maybe don't have the motivation to knock on your door first, is a unique and a very talented person.
I agree. So in terms of the training, I just want to touch on that one thing. Training is obviously going to be critical, not only for the individual themselves, but for the community at large and the nonprofits and all the other organizations that are working with these populations. For about the last 20 years, we have been offering free social work training every month, a 2-hour session. And so anybody in the community, the entire Low Country area, can attend those trainings, and we organize them in such a way that if they attend all of the trainings we offer 10 months out of the year, they will earn all of the CEUs that they need in order to maintain their social work license at no charge, because we offer those trainings for free. The topics of the trainings are determined by a local multidisciplinary team that meets on a regular basis to staff individual cases in Beaufort County, families and individuals who are struggling. So they kind of have a sense of the types of issues that we're dealing with countywide, and that kind of drives their feedback on what types of trainings we need to introduce. So let's say that we've had a suicide, we'll have a training in helping survivors of suicide. If we've had a serious child abuse case happen, we can have trainings that are specific to helping identify children who are being abused sexually. The topics range everything from psychopharmacology to working with sexually aggressive adolescents. A wide range of topics are covered, but we agree that in order to be able to be effective and maintain that kind of effectiveness, we need to stay on the cutting edge and be aware of what's happening in the industry. And so we've been doing these trainings now for about 20 years and making them available to anybody in the community. So whether you're in a nonprofit or wherever, you're able to access them.
I would love to know more about that and be able to help with getting that information, maybe where it isn't, or following up on it with you after the meeting. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, we would welcome that.
David.
Yeah, thank you. Fred, good to see you again.
Hey, David, good to see you.
You've been well. I want to thank you and Ben. I have a high degree of confidence after listening to your presentation and the knowledge that you've displayed. It seems to me that the coordinator has three principal roles. One is to build trust, as you suggested. 2 is to reinforce the network. And 3 is to, I guess, create a database so that good decisions can be made. Out of curiosity, and I know I don't want to belabor this, but if we're at about 10% now because of self-reporting, how do you measure success if you have a coordinator? And then secondly, is that 10% going to be increasing? And then secondly, do the nonprofits who are working within the network at this point, the 65 of them, do they have the capability of giving you names of people, or is there some sort of anonymity that must be in place?
So I'm going to take the last question first, the question of the data and the names. Charity Tracker does record individuals' names, their address, and other identifying information. It also assigns a label value so that if we need to be able to talk about aggregate people, we can do that without disclosing the confidential information. But the database is confidential. Everyone whose information is put into it has to sign a release of information giving us permission to share it, but the information is only shared with the organizations that use Charity Tracker, and we're very, very careful about who has access to Charity Tracker. So for example, law enforcement is not allowed access to the Charity Tracker data. The only organizations that provide food, clothing, and shelter and have a demonstrated mission to do that are allowed to have access to that data. And it's basically so that they can make an informed decision when they decide to help an individual. They can at least find out whether that individual has been getting assistance in the past and from where. And I apologize, I kind of lost your first question. The second one just got me going there. So if you could repeat what your first.
Before we get off the second one, so with the 65 organizations that are involved, we only have what you're estimating to be about 10% of the population, even with the network that you have in place today.
What I'm saying is that the 10% just came, that wasn't a number that we have an estimate of the reality in the community. I was simply saying that statistically, if you're getting 10% of any survey you're conducting, you're getting a good response rate if you're getting 10%. So if optimistically we are saying that what we capture through Charity Tracker is a 10% response rate, then we could be looking at as many as 7,000 individuals in the community. But that's purely statistics. I don't have any hard numbers that document that. I'm simply saying that science tells us that when you conduct a survey, you're doing really good if you get 10%. Most surveys are coming back with 2, 3, 4, 5% of the response rate. So it could be a much higher number than what we think.
Okay, let's not worry about the first question, Tom. In the interest of time, I will say thank you to Fred and to Ben. Appreciate your comments this morning. It's a big subject that I know little about. Thank you.
And I will too, Fred and Ben, thank you very much. I think the more informed we become as a council and the community becomes, the better able we are to deal with this. I think there's a lot more to follow, and I like the idea of coordinating with the business community as well. Fred, Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate your time.
Take care. Bye.
See you, Fred.
Item 2 under new business, Ann Siren, the Sandalwood Food Pantry lease.
Yes, thank you, sir. Good morning. For the record, I'm Ann Siren, a senior planner for the town. I'll be presenting information about a potential lease of town-owned property to the Sandalwood Community Food Pantry for a permanent facility. I'm joined on today's call with Dr. Nanette Pearson, who's the director of the pantry, and Mr. Al George, who's assisting Dr. Pearson with this project. Staff recommends that you forward a recommendation to Town Council to authorize the town manager or his designee to execute a lease of a town-owned property to the pantry to build that permanent facility. There are 2 properties that would be suitable for the development. One is the former Beaufort County Transfer Station. That's near the intersection of Pembroke Drive and Nature's Way. And the other is the former Children's Center site on Matthews Drive. If the committee recommends the Children's Center site, staff recommends a condition of a more robust adjacent street buffer for that property, which I'll describe more fully in a minute. The approval of a lease agreement will allow the pantry to build a permanent, resilient facility on the island. It'll be built to withstand damage from natural disasters so the pantry can continue to serve their clients even after a natural disaster. The development of the pantry is consistent with our plan. 3 of the strategies, Inclusive Strategy 3.2, Connected Strategy 3.4, and Infrastructure Strategy 5.5. A little bit of background on the pantry. It's a 501c3 volunteer-based organization committed to reducing hunger on the island. It was established in 2009 to serve children in the Sandalwood Terrace, which is how it got its name. They currently serve 950 clients. They've expanded and relocated 5 times since they've been established. It's currently located in the Queen Chapel AME Church on Beach City Road, but they've run out of space for the facility. Last year, the pantry approached the town to build a permanent facility on town-owned property. And so staff examined all the undeveloped town-owned property in the Mid and North Island areas. We ruled out properties that are too small or are covered in wetlands, that are designated for future uses, that have covenants, or are located in areas that are incompatible with a community services use, like a food pantry. There are 2 undeveloped town-owned properties that could meet the pantry's need. Again, the former Children's Center site on Matthews and the former transfer station. Both of those sites are located in the Parks and Recreation, or PR, zoning district. That zoning district does allow community service uses like the pantry. They're both located within the Corridor Overlay District. Properties in that district are required to have Design Review Board approval of development. So the facility would require DRB review of the building and site. Both the properties are at least 1 acre, which is the minimum size that the facility needs. They both have access to minor arterial streets, and they both have access to or are located on the pedestrian pathway network. About, I think, half of the pantry's clients arrive by foot or by bicycle. The pantry would prefer to use the former Children's Center site due to having more building potential and better visibility. The condition that I mentioned about the Children's Center site is that staff would recommend a Type E Option 2 buffer for that site along Matthews Drive. It's typically a buffer required for a major arterial street like 278. Matthews Drive is a minor arterial street, so it wouldn't normally have a buffer this robust. But basically the buffer requires more vegetation, and so that would better screen the facility from Matthews Drive. And that's a consistent condition that the town is required for other properties where there's development on a town-owned property. That kind of buffer wouldn't be needed for the former transfer station. It's set back from Pembroke Drive quite a way, and there's already quite a bit of existing vegetation to screen it from Pembroke Drive. So again, staff recommends that you forward a recommendation to town council to authorize the town manager or his designee to execute a lease of one of these 2 properties to the pantry to build their permanent facility. With that recommendation, staff would bring a resolution to town council on April 20th. The resolution would confirm that town council supports leasing one of these properties to the pantry. After that resolution is approved, staff would work with the pantry to draft a lease with additional details about the development. Staff would present the lease to town council for approval in late spring. And if you have any specific questions about the pantry or the proposed facility, Nanette Pearson and Al George are available on the call today to answer those. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ann. Committee, what are your comments or questions? And the pantry would prefer the former Children's Center for the reasons that you stated. Does staff have any recommendation between the 2 properties?
No, sir. I think either would be appropriate for the use.
Tom, I have a question.
David.
I'd like to ask Ms. Pearson a question. What's the coordination among the food insecurity agencies on the island? Does the pantry get food from Second Helpings? How does the pantry relate to Deep Well and so on?
There. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Forgive me for I have to get my second Pfizer shot in Walterboro shortly, and so I was anxious about the time. So thank you so much. Yes, I've worked. I noticed Fred didn't mention Sandalwood Community Food Pantry, but we're going into our 13th year. I work close with Deep Well with Betsy since opening and with Sandy now. And we're actually Second Helping's #1 distributor of all the salvaged food on the island and have been for the last 10 years. So we work very closely together. So thank you for that question.
Nanette, it came from the perspective of having been involved with a lot of nonprofits and the community foundation over the years, and just making sure that we aren't creating disparate organizations when the coordination is so important for efficiency reasons. And what's the difference between what Deep Well does and what the Pantry does?
Yes. Well, what I can say best is about 2 months ago, Sandy came again to visit the Pantry and visit as a friend, and she brought her staff. And she was amazed when she watched the hundreds of people go through our food line, which is a free choice pantry. It's a healthy whole food pantry and basic needs. But she said to me, you know, Nanette, we've watched for an hour and a half now, and there is only one client that comes here that frequents Deep Well. And she said, it's amazing how different what we have to offer is and the people that come. And it was good to hear Sandy say that. Looking at it and really getting a good idea. We don't have funds to pay for rents and all the utilities and all the many things that Deep Well does. Deep Well's food is a little bit more limited, where ours is a free choice. The families come every single week and do receive as much as they need. So it's a bit of a different circumstance, and there isn't a lot of overlap at all, which was identified, which I thought was interesting for her to see. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Tom, no further questions.
Thank you, Nanette. Alex.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Pearson, Dr. George, nice to see you all. I will first start with, I am so impressed that you have been in service for 13 years. Unfortunately, also moved 5 times. I will say personally to my colleagues and to the community that once a week I can see Dr. Pearson's activities firsthand because she is right next door to my office. It's amazing the work that they're doing. The Children's Center site, I'll speak to that. I am, off the cuff in favor of that because with Bilo leaving Port Royal Plaza, we have, in a sense, even created a food desert on the north end of the island. So staying in close proximity to those neighborhoods is definitely important. I'm curious to know where you are in your planning, Dr. Pearson, as far as funding for the facility. Are we still at a conceptual phase, or are you deeper than that?
Thank you. It's good to see you, Alex. Thank you so much. We have moved very quickly, faster than I thought. We've secured clearly almost about $350,000 in fundraising for the Resilient Pantry. And I will let Mr. George address the facility building because that's also ready to go and exciting. And so, Al, I'll let you answer that question. But financially, we're very delighted with the progress we've made in such a short period of time. Yeah.
Yes, thank you all for your attention and your support of this concept this morning of the Pantry Resilience. We were given a courtesy review by Mr. Bear in terms of looking at the preliminary design. That design was given sort of an initial approval pending site location. So we have actually developed the actual physical building structure in collaboration with the architects. The only thing we're looking for now is the physical site. Then we can, once we have the physical site location, then we can go towards final review with the Hilton Area Design Review Board.
Okay, thank you. I'll just make this final comment for council and staff. I view this as a partnership with Dr. Pearson. We have in the previous agenda item, realized that our problem is real, right? And here's an opportunity for us to move the needle in a different direction. So to whatever degree we can be involved in the planning of not just the structure, but the importance and the messaging behind it, I think we need to be. I can appreciate the normal process in terms of us resoluting a lease, but to whatever degree we can be involved along the way, I think is important.
Other comments? Glenn?
Thank you. I too am very impressed with your presentation here. I do have a question though. Does a family need to go through some sort of qualification process in order to be eligible to receive the food from the pantry?
Yes, Glenn. In fact, there were so many issues I wanted to break into, but time for me and this second shot is so critical. When Fred was speaking, I'm an agency with the Low Country Food Bank of Charleston, one of 320 agencies, and we are no longer going to be using Charity Tracker. And we're using a new system now. USDA Federal wants us to go on this new computer system. So that's really important. But to get to your question, every one of our clients have to have an intake done. And then there's a specific amount of finances that keep them below poverty line. That's all listed. And as soon as they look at those numbers, which I have posted on the pantry and visible for them, then if they meet that requirement, then they get not only the food at the pantry, which is very good whole food. We get all our fresh fish from Piggly Wiggly, all our dairy, our fresh eggs. We do get the salvaged food, but we get all our fresh produce from Campbell family. So it's a really beautiful, healthy. The health of our clients has literally, our type 2 diabetes is lowered. We send one person every 6 months to Vim, where 12 years ago we sent 10 a week. And so many things Tamara brought up are so critical. Again, Fred didn't mention Sandalwood, but I served 33 homeless. The last 2 homeless people we put into housing both ended up dying in those apartments. So trust is critical. But yeah, we do an intake. We get to know the families. We get to know what their needs are. If there's specific needs like mental health, we know how to send them to that particular organization. I work pretty close personally, interpersonal relationships. What I will say too is, so there is a process we go through, and it's pretty rigorous. With COVID, we've been doing it outdoors. 56 weeks we've been serving outdoors, rain or shine. It's exhausting. But when we were indoors, we had the intake. They would sit down. We'd go over everything with Spanish. If Spanish, we speak dual language and Italian, 3 languages. And get all the information needed, and they're allowed to get as much food as necessary for as long as they need. We also diaper all their babies. It's such a critical issue. I fought on the Martin Luther King Committee for years for 10.10 minimum wage. We still are at 7.25, and I feed a lot of working poor that carry 2 jobs, not 1 job. And this food that I give them, which is about $300, sometimes to $400 a week, allows them to pay their rent on the $7.25 with 2 jobs. So I feel so much like Alex. Together as a community, we have to work together to lift up, because I always felt this way. I think hunger erodes the family and the community and its stability, and it does impair people to achieve independence. And what I want to do is have these people I love so much achieve independence, be part of this beloved community. And I know it's a reality. It can happen because of the support. So, that was supposed to be a short question, Glenn. But yes, we go through extensive process of intake, and then they sign in 2 spots. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer. We'll let you go on and get your other vaccination.
Thank you. And I'm going to leave it in the hands of Al George, because it's going to take me 1 hour and 20 minutes to get to Walterboro. And thank you. And welcome, Mr. Mark Orlando. Welcome. Al, I'm going to ask you to take over for me. Ann, thank you.
Our committee is being asked to select one of the two sites and then recommend that town council negotiate a lease with the Pantry. The Pantry has informed staff that the former Children's Center site is their site of preference. Any reason for us to select otherwise? David.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the Children's Center site for a couple of reasons. One, it's their preference. Two, staff seems to think it's good, but also it is the former Children's Center site, and the Children's Center has been dedicated to serving the same population that I think probably is being served by the Pantry to a large degree. And so it makes sense to me that we go in that direction. And I would move that we recommend to the full council that the town manager pursue a lease on the Children's Center site.
Thank you for the motion. Is there a second? Thank you, Tammy, for the second. Any additional discussion? If there is none, Karen, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes.
Thank you. Agenda item 3 under new business, the CDBG Entitlement Program Annual Action Plan to be presented by Marcy Benson.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Marcy Benson, Senior Grants Administrator for the town. Today, staff is recommending the committee forward a recommendation to Town Council to select the Patterson Park as the 2021 Community Development Block Grant Project for inclusion in the 2021 Annual Action Plan. Back in February, the town received notification from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that the 2021 CDBG allocation amount will be $229,188. The Patterson Park project was originally included in the 2018 Annual Action Plan, and it was designated to receive the remaining $118,000 in 2018 CDBG funds after the Boys and Girls Club Pavilion project was funded with $200,000 from that year's funds. Approval of the Patterson project as the 2021 CDBG project for inclusion in the town's annual action plan will allow this year's funding allocation to be paired with the remaining 2018 funding allocation, and it will provide a total of approximately $347,000 for the park project. Approval of the Patterson Park project is consistent with the 2018 Annual Action Plan for CDBG funding, as well as several Our Plan goals, strategies, and tactics, which are referenced in the staff memo. To meet HUD requirements, public input must be solicited during the development of the Annual Action Plan. This was met with a CDBG survey that was posted on the Open Town Hall portal from February 24th through March 8th, and there was a virtual public meeting held on March 4th. No comments were submitted during the virtual public meeting, and one comment was submitted via the Open Town Hall portal, and that comment is summarized in the staff memo. HUD does allow for CDBG funds to also be used for program administration and public services. However, there are spending caps associated with those expenditures, which allow for no more than 20% of the allocation to fund administrative costs and no more than 15% of the allocation for public services. Due to the COVID pandemic, HUD waived the public services cap for program year 2020 for both the CDBG funds and the special CDBG COVID allocations. To date, approximately $730,000 in 2020 CDBG funds and the special CDGB funds have been distributed to public service organizations servicing low and moderate income residents within the town. These funds were distributed through an agreement the town has with the Community Foundation of the Lowcountry. Attached to the staff memo was a 5-year consolidated plan project table, which is from the town's most current HUD-approved 5-year plan. For 2021, which is program year 2, the project category included the flexibility to select a project that could address a broad range of community needs that would benefit low and moderate income residents. The draft 2021 annual action plan indicates $5,000 for of the allocation to be used for administrative costs, and those could be such costs as publication for public meeting notices, as well as environmental review notices. Therefore, the remaining $342,000 can be used for the Patterson Park project. In order to meet the May 17th HUD submittal deadline, the draft plan is scheduled to be released for the required 30-day public comment period tomorrow, based on the direction of the committee meeting today. And then approval of the final plan by resolution is scheduled for the May 4th Town Council meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the CDBG annual action plan.
Thank you, Marcy. So we have a pretty short timeline within to work. I would anticipate a lot of public comment during the next 30-day period. What are your questions and comments, committee? Glenn.
Thank you. Marcy, thank you for the presentation. We certainly support the concept of using these types of grant funds for these purposes. This is more of a curiosity than anything else. Has there been any sort of preliminary design for the facilities to be on that park site?
There's been no design yet, no.
Will there be cooperation with the Parks and Recreation Commission in developing that plan? I see Jennifer wants to answer.
If I can butt in here for a minute, staff has looked at the site conceptually just to make sure that we could fit some park elements onto the site. What we need to do now, what we're working on, is researching if there are any other uses. Initially, we were talking about potentially a partnership with Habitat for that site, and we have learned that the funding sources for purchasing that property won't allow that, but we're checking to make sure what other restrictions we might have to determine how big of a park would go there. And then, yes, sir, of course, we will work with the community and through the Parks and Rec Commission before a final design is brought forward for approval.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David.
Yeah, Jennifer, I have a request. Can you, for the public's benefit, pull up a map showing where Patterson Park is located?
Of course. Give me just a second here.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want, while I'm searching for it, I apologize. We should have had it ready to pull straight up, but if you all want to go on, I'll pop back on and share my screen as soon as I grab that map.
Thank you, Jennifer. Alex.
Yes, thank you. Marcy, I guess this is more of a process question. The 5-year plan chart that you have included in the packet, is there a particular committee that, I guess, for lack of better words, is in charge of that, developing that, or is that just staff?
It was a combination. Last year when we were developing the 5-year plan, it was presented to a town council committee for review and comment before the project list went into the plan.
Okay, well, I guess this is just something for us to consider. And this is based off of past experience, most particular last year, where the community block grant funding became somewhat of a grab, and there were, multiple requests, and it seemed as if it was not necessarily a more pleasant activity. Okay, in some cases, organizations, individuals that support one another may have been trying to display reasoning why one should get the money instead of the other, right? So I guess I'm just suggesting that since we are looking at a 5-year horizon and we are attempting to use the hour plan as a guide, that maybe we get a little bit more detailed as it relates to the actual projects. The priority need addressed, as I look at the columns here, I mean, basically it's just a copy and paste from 2018 down to the last year of 2024. I'm provoking us to think a little bit deeper in terms of how we allocate these funds so that we accomplishing those goals. And maybe there's a need for us to have a hopper of projects that can be debated, I guess, more intelligently over time. So I'm just trying to do better than what we've done in the past in terms of the public being more informed and the council being more involved as to how we get to point C from point A.
Can I mention something? Great.
Absolutely.
So I know that in the 5-year plan list, the project list, the categories of projects seem very broad. That was done specifically because when we had our first 5-year plan in 2015, we were very specific and we named particular projects for all 5 years. But then what happened was we did a pivot and we needed to do different projects than were listed, which then that included doing a substantial amendment to the consolidated plan, which is doing all of the public's information requirements all over again, and then doing individual annual action plans. So we decided that if we give broad categories in the 5-year plan, then when we come back each year for the annual action plan, we can fit in a specific project that we know we can accomplish that year into that broad category that's listed in the 5-year plan. So the 5-year plan is the broad brush, flexible type of category, and then the annual action plan would be the specific project that we would undertake with those funds, if that makes sense.
Sure, that helps. I thank you for that. The only pushback I have on that is in 2015 we were absent a more relative comprehensive plan that we're dealing with on the ground issues at the moment, right? So I think we can pivot to a degree in another direction at this point, and hopefully it will help with these short timelines that we've been given to the public. Again, I'm just looking to enhance, but thank you for the explanation.
Jennifer.
I can share my screen now and show you the map.
Good.
Okay, can you see the map here on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this crook here, this is William Hilton Parkway, and this is Broad Creek near the bottom of the screen coming up. This little green rectangle here on the creek, that is the Patterson Park property. So it's across from Alex Patterson Drive. Here, if I zoom in, you can see the spot a little bit better. It's that green parcel.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate your doing that.
You're welcome. And just for context, here's the Children's Center would be here that you were just talking about. There's the circle over to the right of the screen at Matthews Drive and Marshland. So it would be in proximity to that site as well.
That helps a lot.
Great.
Other comment from the committee? If there are none, we are being asked to recommend to Town Council the selection of Patterson Park as the 2021 Community Development Block Grant Project for inclusion in this year 2021 CDBG Annual Action Plan.
I would make the motion that we pass that recommendation on to the full council.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any further discussion? If there's none, Karen, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Mrs. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Lennox,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
Mr. Stanford,
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 4-0. Last new business agenda item we have is the fire rescue presentation of the 2020 calendar year annual report. Now, I know, Brad, you have been waiting patiently. The committee is yours, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good deal. Okay. Yeah, thanks for having us. I've got some of my team members waiting in the wings if we've got some questions later on, but I'll jump right into our presentation, which I think you all have. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
All right. Like I said, good morning, everyone. And this is our review of calendar year 2020, a year that emergency services hasn't really seen since probably 9/11, I would tell you. So what we'll do this morning real quick is cover our statistics for the calendar year, some of our accomplishments related to COVID, and then some other things we still managed to complete, and then some initiatives as we move in through 2021 and 2022. So our overall incident total last year did drop a little bit, 2%. The year before, in 2019, we were right at 7,000, almost 7,900, and then last year we dropped a couple hundred calls. And I think you can contribute that to the downturn in March related to emergency response. And we're certainly seeing an uptick this year with the island being busy. So some other data we look at every year, day of week, hours per day. None of this data has really changed much. You can see the consistency there in time of day and day of week. Calls by month, I would point out, you can see what happened. Obviously, March 15th, March 13th last year was when everything changed, and you can see the drop off there in our calls for service into April. Excuse me. And then, you can see it start to come back up through the summer. And then for a reason I can't really explain, it dropped a lot in September too, which I can just contribute to the fact that people did, get ready for school and things like that in the fall. So we did have a drop off there. It turned out, like I said, 200 calls different. So we look at our fire response last year. Here again, the charts just show the workload distribution by the 7 fire stations, the white chart. And then the darker chart shows the actual apparatus from those stations, which tends to mirror the chart at Station 1 in Shipyard, and Station 5 in Hilton Head Plantation are the busiest stations. And then the workload you can see through the other fire stations and the fire responses is pretty consistent generally, which shows our deployment model works for our community. This, the first chart there, talks about total fire incidents versus EMS, and there again we're about 75-25, somewhere in there. That 75% EMS, 25% fire-related incidents. The other chart, I have staff break down so that we can get a little further into the details of, okay, if we're having fires, what are those fires? And you can see the single family went up last year, multifamily, residential, those are apartments. And then you can see the commercial building fires, a brush or grass fire, vehicle fire. So our point there is if we're having certain fires in certain type of occupancies, what is the cause and what can we do to try to help prevent those. The National Fire Incident Reporting System, that's the chart you see. This is what all fire departments across the country, how they report calls for service. As you can see, EMS is the blue. Fire calls are actually where there was some sort of fire. And then the green you see is a false call, which is usually up around 1,000 for us, some sort of false calls. The service calls you see, the purple, have gone up over the years. And then the others, a good intent call, that could be someone thinks they see smoke, but it's really steam. So I just present this chart to show you that we track data consistent with other fire departments across the country, and this is how it's coded. So as we look at our fire data, we also look at our fire loss. Like I said, this goes back to January of 2020, starting for the 12 months. And we did, we had a lot. I say a lot. We had, you can see single family homes were most of our fire calls. We did have the multi-family down in Palmetto Dunes last January. And unfortunately, we did have a fire fatality at Monticello early in 2020. We had the laundromat fire down on New Orleans Road. Significant loss there. And then as we moved into the second half of the year, the commercial fire was down in Sea Pines, the golf maintenance, which they're currently, I noticed the other day, they're repurposing that building. So we track this, we identify our fire loss and present this data as part of our accreditation report too. Another aspect that I am required to present to the elected officials is our incident response time data that we track for accreditation. And it's over 5 years, and I would tell you this fall, the fire accreditation peer team will be back to review our documentation, and we will be up for reaccreditation in the spring of 2022. So as reporting our time, benchmark time versus our actual baseline time, our performance time, and then we do a gap analysis. So on our fire incidents last year, you can see that our time actually increased, and this is going to be directly related to the change in our call taking processes, changes in our PPE, especially on the EMS, which is the next chart, and our total response time, as you can see, went up by 23 seconds. So in the previous years on the chart, you can see from the time we received the call until the fire truck arrived curbside, we were somewhere around 8:40, 8:45. Last year, we went up over 9 minutes. So that gives us a 5-year total of 846. So like I said, a lot of that had to do with our process changes. Everything slowed down in March, obviously with COVID. So hopefully this year, as things change a little bit, we go back to our standard responses, this chart will change. So as I mentioned, EMS, drastic change in our call and our alarm handling time. This is the time the dispatchers are on the phone obtaining information from the caller. Well, that clearly changed last year when we had to implement additional questions, screening questions related to COVID. And you can see that by the chart, 40 seconds. And I actually think 40 seconds is not that bad of an increase based on the challenges our communications dispatchers had to go through to implement the new protocol, go through the questions, the challenges for the public to reply to the questions. The whole process slowed down drastically. You know, we're all about handling things efficiently, getting out the door, getting to the scene, and making a difference in a timely manner, and COVID slowed all that down. So obviously our turnout time and more PPE related to EMS response, and then our overall travel time as we slowed down, you can see was up 45 seconds. So almost 50-second increase. And the bottom number down there, just so you know, the N number equals 5,500. That's the number of incidents this data was pulled from, that where our unit ran lights and sirens from the time they left until they arrived curbside. Any event where we back off lights and sirens is not included in the data, because this is data to see if our response model and protocols can match our benchmark times. So there again, we're starting to change. We changed some protocols recently to get the closest unit to the scene. I would tell you, during COVID, all EMS agencies, fire departments, they did not send in, we'd send one person in as the initial caregiver to evaluate the situation based on identify one of our 3 levels of PPE. So everything slowed down, and that's reflected in this data. Even if we sent an additional unit to the EMS call, they would stage outside, and we would not send those persons in until we knew the scene was safe, and we only sent in those number of people we needed so that we didn't potentially expose those persons to the virus. So our whole philosophy and whole response changed in March, and I think that's reflected in the data. So as we come out of this and we start to revert back to our standard protocols, we'll see where this data is next year. Under fire reporting, we also always look at our open burning. The number 365 you see is that's how many pit permits were called in and registered on the burn days we had. Allocated the 2 per month, and then the next number is the number of inspections by our personnel out in the field. We issued 16 warnings and ended up with only 2 citations, which is good. That means compliance is good. So we'll go into some of our EMS statistics, just like we do for fire. We look at the medical incidents by station zone, which is the pie chart you see. They're again fairly consistent with Station 1 and Shipyard, and Station 5 in Hilton Head Plantation, with the workload those 2 stations have, and then the other stations, you can see the percentages there between 8 and 12%. So pretty consistent. Likewise, the bar graph shows the response by apparatus, and those are fairly consistent with Station 1 and 5 having the most responses. So we look at some other numbers for our EMS. We look at EMS calls by disposition. These are what is the outcome of the call. The grand total, we had 5,810 emergency incidents that we logged into our system. We transported 3,886, and you can see the other numbers there. Lift assist calls are 650, which they've gone up dramatically over the last few years. The other chart I would tell you is the dispatch protocol. This is what the protocol assigned by the dispatchers when they take the call based on the caller information. They have a set of protocols that then guides their questioning. So on that side, from the initial call in, you can see falls, general sick persons, fainting and breathing problems are by far the highest protocol that's attached to to the type of incident. That also determines if we send 1 unit or 2 based on the level of the type of protocol assigned to it by our communication specialist. A couple other charts we have presented in the past few years as we dealt with the opioid crisis. You can see the first one, the Narcan. The number was dropping as we were very hopeful it would stay down, but then obviously with the stress on the community and the world in general, the number of Narcan administrations by our staff went up from 19 to 20. So there again, we'll have to see how we come out of this, but or see if the number levels off. But it did tick up a little bit. The other chart was the inter-facilities that we do on the island, from the hospital to another facility. Typically it's Savannah or Charleston. And then also that's the blue graph where we hit 71 in 19. We've been engaged with the hospital. We've talked to the CEO about trying to get this number down using more private carriers, because when they do utilize our resources, that's resources we don't have to provide here to the public. The orange chart is where they do transports via helicopter from the hospital to the helicopter, and we pick the crew up at the airport, take them to the hospital, pick up the patient, bring them back, help them load, and then they leave from the airport. That is the orange, and you can see that number's dropped a little bit. That one's dictated by the hospital. So those are our EMS numbers. Staffing, I know Mr. Harkins isn't here this morning. He's always quizzing me on the staffing. So last year, during the calendar year, we hired 10 new firefighters. We hired our new communications manager, and we hired 1 new dispatcher. That all occurred before March. We hired our deputy fire marshal before March, and then we had a mechanic leave us in the fall, and I added in this presentation that we were fortunate to get a mechanic hired with experience early in January, so that's good. The members that exited the department, we had 2 retirements in 2020. We had 8 resignations, and of those 8, 6 left the area for one reason or another. And then currently we have 6 line positions that are vacant. We have 3 firefighters in the academy in Columbia right now. They'll finish up in May. And we have 3 that we just brought on. They went to the academy in early January and just hit the streets a week and a half ago. So, but we're still 6 positions short, and we just completed our application process. You may have seen that, and I know this morning we just got word that we ended up with 190 applications, which is about 90 less than 2019 when we last did this. So we'll see how the candidate pool shakes out as we move through the next part of the process. So some accomplishments last year, and I don't think my presentation here this morning will really do justice to what the team did here. Obviously, when COVID hit, we had to figure out how to protect our staff so that we could protect the public, and then we had to, protecting our staff protected their families. So it was a, stressful time for everyone. PPE was limited. We set up a logistics section in our classroom down here just to work the phones and try to find PPE, which, the entire country was facing that challenge. The communication center, we immediately, as I mentioned in the timing, we changed the protocols. So they follow strict protocols. Well, now we put in new protocols for them to ask questions. So that changed their duties, overnight. So they had to adjust to that. We hired a doctor of nurse practitioner to help us navigate our personnel being exposed, or if they were sick, getting them tested. So that's been a big benefit. We were aggressive in our testing early on. Even when you couldn't get testing, we worked with the hospital to try to get our line personnel and our dispatchers tested quickly so we could get them back to work, so that we could maintain our service level and not force people to come in and fill those spots. So that worked fairly well. So interesting times, as I said. I presented this chart to the committee last September. And this kind of highlights where we were in February. And our EMS Battalion Chief Tom Boothaway, he sensed where we were headed, and he sent out information to our staff on Valentine's Day. And then you can see the ramp up as we went through the end of February as things started to unfold out in Kirkland, Washington. And then for us, that was an EMS response to a nursing home. And then what we started to do internally through the first week of March, and then, like I said, I always say March 13th is the date I always remember that things really changed. So you can see all the different initiatives we did there through the 2 to 3 weeks as we headed into April of 2020. So our screening process that we're still using, we implemented the PPE training and PPE guidelines. So like I said, the presentation, as I look back and I put this together, I'm like, well, this presentation is pretty easy to put together, but it was very stressful times. So very proud of what the team accomplished over here. Prior to COVID, we actually held a leadership retreat last February. That seems like a long time ago, but we all got together at the Omni for 2 days. The entire leadership team, admin, the line officers, and we came up with goals on how we could better improve and work together as the leadership team to move fire rescue forward and to better serve the community and to promote our individuals in their skill set to become, better leaders, better employees. And we came out of that we actually used SCORE for that, the local group, and they were very good. The team was very impressed, but I'll be honest with you, the information, as soon as we left that in February, we had our awards and advancement ceremony, and then we hit March and everything changed. So we have the documentation from the meeting, and we're starting to go back through that. We feel like now we're at a point we can breathe and look back at what we want to pull out of that to improve our department. Also, right before March, we moved into the temporary fire station down to Sea Pine Center, and they started to replace Station 2. We also implemented our video laryngoscopes, which was an upgrade to our EMS equipment. And then as we went through the year, the slide before showed you all the efforts the team went through to try to acquire PPE and change protocols and keep our team safe and keep the public safe. But Tom Dunn worked with the hospital, and we helped with those 2 large-scale testing events in June and August that we did the drive-through down to school. We had team members out there that supported those with the hospital. And then the community testing that started at the Hilton Head Hospital in late September, if I recall. We've had team members up there helping the hospital since right at the end of November, and they're still up there today. We kind of went with the increase in January and February. We were sending 2 people up there a day to help the hospital with the drive-through testing. This month, we're sending 1 person through March, and we're going to allow our people that want to volunteer to continue to go help in April. We did sign a contract with DHEC, so we're getting reimbursed per employee for those employees up at the hospital. On the days they work, we get reimbursed for the number of hours, and DHEC provided us a bucket of money of $40,000, and at that point, when the $40,000's up, we'll see where we're at if there's a need to continue. So we are getting reimbursed through that. We've had a lot of team members up there to support that effort. I know the hospital, between testing and the vaccinations, their staff has been under the gun throughout this. Some other accomplishments, we continue to work on a few of the goals outlined in our strategic plans. Obviously, things slowed down last year with everything else happened related to COVID and the workload with that. And we did get our E911 comm center upgraded and our EOC updated and remodeled to give us a little more room in that space. The Bureau of Fire Prevention implemented a food truck inspection program, and working with the PSD, we installed 2 hydrants as part of our initiative with them to improve the hydrant access. And at the end of the year, we managed to get the Christmas light display up and running, and we did our Santa and Sirens a little differently this year. Obviously, there wasn't as much public interaction with Santa and Sirens, but it still went over well. So had to keep those two initiatives going on, keep the spirit up at the end of a long year. Some other accomplishments, Tom Dunn and Community Development over at the town worked to get us a Hurricane Strong designation from the Federal Alliance for Safe Houses. So another recognition of the work we do in emergency preparedness and preparing our community. We completed a fleet maintenance storage building out behind our headquarters. We updated some technology by putting CAD Station in, which this is a router using our map for the crews. Back in the day, we had big wall maps where the crews would go over. Now with technology, they can actually be directed. We implemented Rapid SOS in the 911 call center, and I would tell you this is a big enhancement because it uses your cell phone technology with an interface to our CAD so that if someone calls in and says they're at the north end Publix, but they're really at the south end Publix, traffic on the bridges, and one accident on 278 would tie up traffic for hours prior to the Cross Island. And yeah, we've had times where the personnel coming to work would be delayed, and we'd hold people over until they get to the fire station. So it does, yeah, it happens.
Well, I think that just as Alex was suggesting that we monitor the percentages of fire rescue personnel, I think we should be doing the same thing with educators and so on. I think that building community inside out will get us to a place that we can be proud of. So I parry what Alex was saying there. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned that Shipyard Station 1 and Hilton Head Plantation Station 5 in the EMS statistics. By any chance, are Shipyard's statistics mainly guests and Hilton Head Plantation mainly residents?
The data would show that there's so many villas and apartments in the Shipyard area. Years ago, Shipyard was always the busiest station because you have the influx of people at the beach. You have a large number of short-term rental units in that area. So you had a lot of responses to that in the summer. Station 5 has the assisted living facilities and that along Main Street and the others, and that keeps their numbers up consistently throughout the year, where the Shipyard numbers tend to go up more in the summer, spring and summer, and are a little bit lower in the winter because they're, the Seabrook is down there, which all of our roughly 25% of our calls are related to the Tide Point, Seabrook, Cypress, Bayshore, and then the smaller complexes along Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
Those contribute to our call volume, and that's why you see Station 5 with all those facilities at Hilton Head Plantation, and then you have the Shipyard, the influx of that summer group of people and the renters in that area that bring them up consistent with Station 5, but down at Hilton Head Plantation. But
the thrust of my question was, does a guest have to pay a fee that's different than a resident under these circumstances?
No, the ambulance fee is a user fee, for the billing for the EMS service. But I guess for the hospitality tax would be the only that is used for some of our funding would be the only tax they would pay.
Thank you. No further questions, Tom.
Tammy.
Well, first, thank you, Chief, for your presentation. Thank you to each and every one of those who work within fire and rescue. They are above and beyond the best of the best, well-trained. They have great person-to-person skills. You've got great, and I'm incredibly of all of you and grateful. When you are in a position where it's amazing how you hear nothing else. And that time that there's nothing else but listening for that sound. And you don't think about what you hear. Take a moment to understand that there's someone waiting in anticipation when there's nothing else they want to hear but that ever approaching sound of those sirens. Critical, and we're grateful, and thank you. Secondly, I'll jump, actually, there's going to be three things, and I know that we're running long, but I wanted to just jump in there, and along with that, do my public service announcement that please, in your homes, make sure that you have a way out safely. If you have a second or a third floor or more on your home, please make sure that you have not only smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, but have one of the ladders available so that you have a way out. Know an escape plan so that you can get out safely. You lose your house, that's one thing. If you lose a person or a pet, there's no, that's, I don't need to say it, you know what that means. And then, so that please everyone pay attention to that. Take a moment, make those plans, especially if you're someone who has a rental property and you're putting guests in your home. Make sure that your home or your rental property is completely equipped with those types of devices that will save lives and help out our fire and rescue team when they get there. And then I just wanted to ask a question. I know that for, and I should know, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but the town offers a stipend for the sheriff's department. We do employees who choose to live on the island, correct? Do we have?
Well, you broke up a little bit. I think your question was about the stipend that's provided.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah, there is no stipend for fire rescue.
There is none.
No.
Well, as we talk about the items with regard to salary, when we talk about being able to afford housing on the island, I think that one of the places that maybe we should consider is also helping to provide maybe an additional stipend through our budget to allow more fire and rescue who choose to live on Hilton Head, who may need to bridge a little bit, some additional dollars in that way. That will help out a lot, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, and certainly advise us in terms of what you see and what your thoughts are, Chief. I think that'd be an important for us to look at as we go into our budget season. Right. That's all I had to say, but again, thank y'all.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a couple of points that, and from what I hear from Deputy Chief Blankenship, who does the hiring, there is no rental on Hilton Head. And what rental's out there, I think it's hard to come by, and what is there is very expensive now, as opposed to when I came in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s, new employees could always find a place to rent, even if they ended up maybe relocating off Hilton Head as they started a family or something like that. But a lot of them would initially set up on Hilton Head, and right now the rental market out there is just outside of what a lot of them can afford, especially if they're coming by themselves. So I do want to give a shout out to Mark, and we, as part of this hiring process, we are recognizing people that come in with a paramedic certification with a bonus. We're recognizing them if they're already an EMT and a firefighter certified. We're recognizing them with a bonus, because we will hire people. We always want to hire people that do not have experience. But at times when we get behind, like we have this past year, because the fire academy shut down last year, so trying to get people in the pipeline to get them on shift was slowed down dramatically. So I always want to hire individuals who want to join the fire service and EMS and do not have any of the certifications. But for those that do, it saves us a tremendous amount of time, especially on the paramedic side, and a tremendous amount of money to send them off to paramedic school. It's 9 months plus another 3 months of us getting them onboarded here. So it's a year from when that person starts, roughly, in addition to the cost. Likewise, if they come in as a certified firefighter, we don't have to send them to Columbia for the 6 weeks. We put them through our orientation here, and within 2 or 3 weeks, we have them ready to go out to the trucks. And that saves us time and money there. So to provide that bonus for hiring this year, it's good timing. I can tell you Bluffton is getting ready to hire. The Charleston area is putting out applications for firefighters. There's been a trend for paramedics and EMS professionals in frontline emergency response have been struggling all over the country to find applicants and maintain people. So it's a trend across emergency services, and we're in an area that along the coast here in the Savannah market that there's just a lot of competition out there for firefighters and paramedics.
Mark, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did, sir. First and foremost, I'm tracking exactly what Chief's saying. I have some experience in just trying to recruit and retain first responders, and my philosophy is you always have to be on your toes. It's a constant full-time job to stay regionally competitive and regionally significant, and a lot goes into that. It's their pay, it's the quality of life, it's their equipment. You know, are they having the best-in-class equipment? And I'll just say, so impressed by Chief, and we talk about world-class, just amazing leadership and an incredible department. I vouch to stay focused and help as much as I can. Councilman Brown brings a good point up. You know, having that local pipeline at an early age and having people believe in the organization well before they're looking for a job is crucial. Chief and I, and really Angie and I, just started comparing some notes on that. But anyway, great job to Chief, great presentation. You set the bar so high in our organization. We'll all be successful if we follow your lead in the way you've defined your department. So very excited to be a part of it.
All right, I appreciate that, but I have a good team with me. I just try to keep the lanes out there and let them do what they need to do. And this past year showed a lot of that. I was just at times trying to keep us all from getting at each other. It was pretty stressful, but I see my job as trying to set the ethical standard and the goals to be a high-performing organization, and the team then can roll down the street, and I just try to give them the guidance to keep them moving forward and improving. So I appreciate the comments, and like I said, my hat's off to my team. So I appreciate everything they do for the community and the town.
Chief Tadlock, thanks for a real good report during real tough times.
Thank
Is
you.
there any other business to come before the committee? If there is none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make motion to adjourn, please.
Thank you all. We stand adjourned.